Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephanie Ivick. I'm the Content Marketing Manager here at eLearning Brothers. We have a great webinar for you today, but first I'll go over a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and we'll email a copy of the recording out to everyone who registered. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to use the questions panel as you need it. We'll get to as many of these as we can, but if we can't get to your question, we'll do our best to reach out and continue the conversation offline afterwards. We have a really fantastic guest today. Joining me is Josh Ledgy, Product Manager for Subscription Content, and also Chris Willis, who is kind of our Director of Product. And they, mostly Josh, but also Chris is here to help you out, will be showing you how to create more inclusive e-learning scenarios. So without further ado, Josh, I'm going to make you the presenter and we can get started.
Let's see. Wait.
We are seeing your desktop now.
We're seeing the
now we're seeing it.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about creating more inclusive scenarios. So inclusive design is something that has come up as a big push within the industry, as we've seen over the last couple of years, just with the way society has shaped out and other challenges that we face. But it's always been an important thing to make sure that everyone is included in our designs. But so today we're going to be talking about how to do that specifically with scenarios that we build. And so today, kind of just an agenda real quick. We'll talk about what inclusive design means in e-learning. We'll then share 5 strategies for designing more inclusive e-learning experiences and scenarios. And then we'll showcase and kind of talk through some examples of some scenarios that Chris and I have built out to bring in this inclusive context into our scenarios. So first off, I want to ask a question. And so Stephanie will be monitoring the chat panel for us. So feel free to answer this question in the chat. And Chris and I will just kind of discuss it here for a minute, so that way you have a chance to type in your response. But what does inclusive design mean to you? So Chris, what does inclusive design mean?
Well, inclusive means, obviously the most literal sense of inclusive is including people, right? Mm-hmm. So I think in the industry, we have a tendency to kind of think of it from depending on who we're talking to and what we're talking about. When some people talk about inclusion, and when I'm speaking to an audience for WCAG, we're talking about accessibility and inclusion, right? But when I'm talking in my neighborhood association and we're talking about our neighbors in our community, then we're talking about people of color, people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, people who are coming from different life experiences. So being inclusive means thinking about a broader picture of who can come to the party, who are we inviting to the party, and who are we leaving out, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah, Chris, I think our attendees are pretty much on the same page as you. Some of the responses that we're getting is a design that makes the user feel that it is meaningful to their background or demographic. Another person said all learners are represented. Someone else said that they're reaching everyone who works for their organization. So yeah, definitely a common thread there.
Yeah, those are all great answers.
That's really important too when you're talking about workplace learning, because so many of us as instructional designers, that is who we're designing for. So making sure that everybody who comes to work can be included in your learning experience, right?
Right. Yeah, so it's really about knowing your audience and your organization and kind of building this culture within it to include everyone and to basically build for one and extend to many, and be able to just reach everybody in where they're at. And so I think we've already defined this quite well at this point, but just to kind of share a more formal definition of this, and this came from an article that actually Stephanie wrote for eLearning Industry last year. It says the goal of an inclusive mindset is to give as many people a seat at the table as possible in your design. So it's taking into account all these different backgrounds and bringing it all to the same, bringing everybody together and kind of figuring out the best solution for all. And so it's creating the best possible experience that everyone can participate in. And so with that being kind of our definition of what inclusive design means, we're going to talk through, and just really quick, inclusive design is also just really good instructional design. So being inclusive means that you've done your homework, you've done everything that you possibly can to include everyone and create a great learning experience for everyone involved. But with that being said, we're going to talk about 5 strategies real quick of how to be more inclusive within our designs. So to start off, we're going to talk about stamping out your own bias in writing. So to be an effective communicator, to be an effective learning experience, it needs to be understood, and that comes from people being engaged in what they're learning, and they really remain engaged when they're included. So think about like a learning experience you've had, or maybe a mentor that you've had that has taught you something really, really valuable. And why did you learn that? Why did you gain what you did from that experience? It's most likely because it was tailored directly towards you and your experience, who you are, maybe this particular challenge you're facing, and that way it's directly applicable to you. And so when we're writing scenarios, when we're writing other learning experiences, we need to tailor what we're saying towards a particular audience. And so, like I like to think about it as learning who our audience is and then applying it to them. One of the best ways that I've found to actually do that, to kind of help understand people, is to create a persona. And personas come from a variety of different disciplines. My background in user experience design kind of that's where I pull it from, but I know marketing uses it, sales uses them. But basically what a persona does is just define who someone is, kind of in more general terms, to say, okay, this is their behaviors, this is who they are. So that way you can keep that in mind as you're designing. And so I found those to be really great to create for different people in our organization. Usually you want to keep in mind maybe like 2 or 3 primary personas and then a couple that are kind of secondary, maybe just slightly deviants from the others, because you really can't process too much more information than that. And I actually did a webinar a couple of years back around this subject that we can send out in the follow-up email if you want to learn more about that particular concept to help you be more inclusive there. But we want to the whole goal is just to stamp out your own bias, understand who people are, and be able to write to engage them.
I think when we talk about bias, I think it's really, really important that nobody feels called out. We all innately have bias. Having bias is part of the human condition. It's something that we came up with as a point of protection, of recognizing who is safe and who is not safe. And unfortunately, as we live in today's society, or we come to work, we're still carrying that kind of deep sense of judging or sorting, who belongs, who doesn't belong, who is safe, who is unsafe, who am I comfortable with, who am I uncomfortable with. That's not, the feelings themselves aren't bad. We're not bad people because we have these feelings, and pretending we don't have them isn't helping. What helps is recognizing that, oh, I'm feeling something right now or experiencing something that I'm not comfortable with. Wow, isn't that exciting? Let's explore it further. Let's figure out what this is about. Let's dig a little bit deeper. And how can I invite more people into my sphere of experience so that I can learn more about them and they can learn more about me? By doing that, we recognize things that maybe before we were trying to avoid or pretend didn't happen, and now we can open ourselves up to them. So this can be culture, religion, gender, people with disabilities, those at different socioeconomic experiences or levels than us, people who come from different communities, urban or suburban areas, rural areas, different educational levels, and people with different family situations. And what we want to try and do is not go out of our way necessarily to make awkward scenarios or things where we are in, hey, I want to try and falsely put something in here that I'm not feeling or doesn't represent because I want to show you that I'm thinking about you. What it means is, how do I recognize when I'm doing something that's coming from my experience and only my experience that isn't going to be real or true or feel inclusive to you? Does that make sense, Josh?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So it's really about authenticity in a lot of ways.
Yes, right.
Acknowledging that you maybe have a little bit of bias, but you're trying to learn from that and learn from others to get past that. And within your organization, you know that there might be some biases there. There might be things that you need to overcome. But it's being authentic to everyone that you're talking to, everyone you're talking about. You're just trying to address everything in the most authentic way possible. And I think like overcoming bias is it's a growing like cycle. It's a growing. It's something that happens over time. It's not really something that when you first start, maybe trying to keep this in mind in your writing, it's not going to come super easy at first. It's definitely going to take some time to become more open and aware in your writing. But it's that learning process that I think is of the most value to you as a designer, and then to your audience as well, because they'll growingly see that you're becoming more and more inclusive to everyone that's involved, and being very authentic and keeping that authenticity there as you're writing is very important.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. The second strategy we're going to talk about is taking a stand for inclusion. So this is about your internal team. Some of you may be a team of one, and so this is really centered on yourself, but many of us work with a larger team, maybe of designers, developers, artists, things of that nature. And it's really about getting everyone to come to a common understanding and be inclusive. So it's allowing people to kind of monitor what's going on and then bring up issues if they arise. So it's saying, okay, we started working on this project. We have this particular situation that's coming up. Okay, maybe it doesn't seem that bad to you, but then another person comes in and says, well, wait, hold on, let's look at this again. And it kind of brings up their perspective, and it's inviting them to share that perspective within their larger team or organization, and saying, well, wait, let's take a look at this. Let's think about it from this perspective, and bringing that in. And that's so that way you can kind of all become, internal experts on these things and be able to, share this experience with each other by being willing to speak up and, look at these things from different angles.
Some organizations have somebody specifically who is responsible for monitoring and making sure that the organization is inclusive, and other organizations do not. As Josh mentioned, a lot of IDs work in a team of one, but you're working in a larger organization. Maybe it's HR, maybe it's in your organization, it's the person who by default carries the role of HR. Some organizations of certain sizes don't have a formal HR department. Whoever those people are, if you can enlist them to help support you in your culture and trying to develop a more inclusive voice and culture, it crosses your marketing, it crosses your learning, it crosses the way that you talk and interact with each other and with colleagues and with vendors and other people in your organization. So if it's not a matter of that everybody in the organization is suddenly going to be an inclusion expert, what you want to do is raise awareness so that people know when they see something and they know how to say something. So that's really what this is. As Josh mentioned, it's a journey. It's not a destination. And sometimes you have to have crucial conversations. It's not comfortable when a client presents you a slide deck that you're using to create the basis of your storyboards, and the characters are very obviously non-inclusive. There's some of your audience that is not represented. Or what's even worse is when people are represented in stereotypical roles, and then you're perpetuating non-inclusive situations. So you have to learn to kind of recognize it, and then you have to be able to be comfortable and enlist others to help you take a stand, and maybe someone who's more tactful than I am in saying things. And I always value those people in my organization, because sometimes I could use a better filter, and they're there to help me with that. So you know who those people are, and get their help.
Great. Let's move on to number 3. So making a business case for inclusion within your organization. And along with that, accessibility is part of being inclusive. We're obviously not going to focus on that today, but that is a big part of all this, is being able to make that business case to go to those that are in a stakeholder position and let them know why this is important, and make them help them understand that we need to be inclusive because our workforce is ever expanding in a number of different ways. We have different generations that are here. We have different ethnicities, people from different countries, maybe people that speak different languages, and we need to be able to value each of those voices equally. And so there has been research, I don't actually have the stats on hand, but where being inclusive increases people's happiness at work, as well as increases sales, the bottom line. And so finding those statistics online and saying, well, here, look at this, if we're more inclusive, we do have some tangibles. We have some, not just, soft data on it. We have some hard data saying, okay, if we're more inclusive, we have these specific business benefits. And there are a number of them. Like if you go out, it's not that hard to find these on the internet, and be able to see, what the value is of having an inclusive mindset within your company. But sometimes it might take a little bit of selling up, depending on who your management is, or whatnot, or how your organization kind of used these things or has in the past. I know that there's still some kind of, I don't know, for lack of better terminology, kind of old guard mentality in some organizations where it's, no, we're this way, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, and there's no budging on that. But I think as we see, we need to continue to be more inclusive, because that's the way that the world is shifting. That's what we need to try. I mean, for me, it's just being a good human being is being inclusive. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is it's treating everybody the same way, but also treating them specifically in their own background and whatnot.
So if we listen to Josh, so obviously there's a generational difference between Josh and I. And if you're listening to Josh, you're hearing that people of Josh's generation really value inclusivity. They value diversity. They value an experience at work where they get to work with people that they can learn and grow from. They value an environment that is fair, and they value seeing themselves in the learning that you're creating. We're going through an experience right now, post-COVID, where companies are thinking very hard about trying to retain and attract the best talent possible. So when they come in and take your learning, they're going to be looking to see, am I valued here? Do I fit here? Is this a place where I want to be for the next X number of years, or even next number of months, right? So that in our role as instructional designers, when we're designing learning, it's important that the people who come in, who are taking your onboarding, who are taking your compliance, who are getting to learn your organization, can see themselves in the learning and see themselves as being represented and part of a fit of that overall culture.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
And that's just good business.
Right. Let's move on to number 4 here. So we've kind of touched on this already, but strategy number 4 is to collaborate to overcome personal bias. As we've talked about already, our workforce is pretty diverse. We have people of various different backgrounds, from maybe different socioeconomical statuses to different education levels, different racial backgrounds and things of that nature. We need to bring all those voices to the table and say, okay, everyone kind of has an equal voice. It's kind of the whole King Arthur and the Round Table concept, where everybody has an equal voice, an equal share of the conversation, because everyone's voice is valuable. There's not, no one should feel like they can't be heard. when you're talking about these things, because a lot of times, yeah, you have your own personal biases, as we've already discussed, that you need to overcome, and the only way to really overcome that is to be exposed to people of different backgrounds. You don't really for me, I grew up in Washington State, and predominantly in a very not ethnically diverse community. And I spent then 2 years after high school, I spent living in Ohio, which is a very much different background for me, from just social and economic status, from a different racial backgrounds and things of that nature. And it really opened my eyes to where maybe my own biases were, and helped me overcome a lot of those things, to where, yeah, I started seeing people in a different light. I started seeing people, again, just as, friends, as colleagues, that kind of thing. And I really value that experience because it helped me just see people in a different light. And I think we all need to take some time to have those experiences and to bring others to the table, and actively seek them out. Don't just be like, because I know if you put something maybe on a company Slack channel or something and say, hey, I need somebody that's, this and this and this and this, you're not going to find them. But if you just go actively invite someone, reach out to them individually and say, hey, I would like to include you in this course that I'm working on. I just need some help of how to apply this to people that have your same background, or find some way to phrase that in a way that invites them into the conversation, makes them feel like they're valued. And I think even that becomes very important, just the personal reach out versus a generic reach out to it. Because I think if you send out a generic thing, you're going to get back generic people. You're going to get back probably a similar group of people each time. But if you actively reach out to them, you'll find more diversity that way.
Yeah. Who are your SMEs? And who are they representing? And where do they come from? What is their worldview? And sometimes we have to make sure that we have, in the broadest sense of the term, a diversity of voices that are our stakeholders, that are helping make sure that we are including everyone in the learning that we're creating. And hey, by the way, some of these conversations will be awkward at first, and we're all figuring this out as we go. What I have found in my experience is that when I've been willing to be vulnerable and put myself out there and say, hey, I know I grew up somewhere where things were like this, and now we're in an environment here, and I'm trying to be better. Will you help me understand your perspective? I don't know. I have never met anybody who has balked at being asked to share their worldview and have another human being, genuinely want to take a vested interest in who they are and what matters to them.
Right. Yeah. And again, it comes back to being authentic and being genuine with them. It's not just bringing them in because, well, I know they have this background. It's saying, no, I know you have this background and I want to learn more about it. It's really just inviting them in because you want to. Because you want to know
but
more.
Then again, it's like, what was the quote I heard the other day? It's like, if you're talking to somebody with autism, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And, so it's like, it's like that as well. We have to also, we can't invite our token person in to come in and represent everybody who looks like them, who is like, thinks like them. There is no one person.
Right.
We're all who we are. But we can ask people about where they are and what their life experience is. And again, being vulnerable about who we are and our life experience and where we know that we don't have all the answers. The more people we can invite to help us figure things out, the better our learning will be for it.
Exactly. So our last strategy here is to represent a diversity because it matters. So we're talking specifically about in scenarios. So maybe some of these eLearning Brothers, we sell cutout characters. That's one of our main libraries. That's one of the main libraries that I oversee here at eLearning Brothers as well. And we have a new launch that you've kind of seen already throughout this presentation, some of these characters, but we'll introduce you more to them in a minute. But there's a lot of value in representing everyone and putting people in different scenarios, making sure that it represents the culture of your company is a big part of that. But just kind of thinking about maybe some biases that might be entering in as you're creating these scenarios. Are you depicting, maybe all of the bosses as a white male, or are there people that are portrayed as stereotypical like minority workers and things of that nature, or are women represented equally throughout these different scenarios? So there's these things that you have to kind of consider is, okay, as you put people into these scenarios, who is the appropriate person who would be in this scenario right now? Because it might not be a person in a suit, or a white, maybe an older white male. It might be someone that's a bit more middle-aged, a bit more maybe in their 30s. That's it doesn't really matter their racial background, but maybe they're in just a button-up kind of thing, just kind of representing whatever needs to happen again for your culture within your company. And also maybe to push it a little bit more diverse if your company is maybe struggling in that department to be inclusive. It's always good to try to just represent everybody equally, and give everybody again an equal chance to be represented, depending on the scenario that you're presenting.
Yeah, it's really the saying, trite but true, be the change. In eLearning, when we're developing a course, our course has a very unique opportunity to portray the world in the way that we want the world to be. And who else gets that? Who else has the power in the organization? Marketing, but we get to portray people in our scenarios in situations that show empowerment of people that we want to see empowered, people of different ages. And it's the reality of our workplace, where we have a new guard of people coming in who are going to be the boss of people who are of my generation, and that's fine. That's great. Yeah, I think everybody who is in authority over my role right now is probably younger than me, and that's fine. I love that. It keeps my ideas fresh and keeps me having a strong perspective, and then they value and learn from my life experience. And it's okay to show that. Not only is it okay to show that in our scenarios, but it is authentic, and it rings true, and it's empowering to the folks who are coming up in your organization to be able to see themselves as being people in positions of leadership and authority.
Right. Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah.
Yep. Josh, you have a question here that's amazing, and I know it's a great it's a great segue as we're moving forward here. Somebody is asking, sorry if you said it and I missed it, but where are your stock photos from? I really love them. So let's get moving forward so we can get into that and actually talk more about that.
Yeah, we'll be showing those here in just a moment. So we're just going to kind of move past here, but like one thing about like we've already I think said before is as you're trying to be more inclusive, don't go back, just keep moving forward. So like old content that you have, don't try to readdress it, just move forward, create new stuff, and slowly it will start to weed out that older content that you have as you move forward with it. And like we have a very, like I think Chris actually mentioned this just a minute ago, is like as designers, we have a very powerful position to affect change within our culture through great design, and to affect that change there. So now we're going to show some scenario examples. And so this is going to be kind of a fun experience. So what we did is we built 2 different scenarios, but well, it's actually the same scenario twice, but we did some different things to each of them, that you'll see here in a minute. But as we're like sharing these scenarios, we want you to think about and answering the questions panel. Think about your feelings about these scenarios, like what does it sound authentic? Does it feel comfortable? Are you seeing any sort of bias within them? If there's anything that you would change, we'd also like to hear that as well. And let's just kind of go and analyze this together as kind of a group exercise, so that way we can just look at these examples and see how we can maybe make them better to be more inclusive within our designs. So we're going to show this to you in Lectora Online, which if you didn't know, also Lectora Online had a new release this last week, so updated interface, something Chris and her team have been working on for quite a while. And so if you haven't checked it out, feel free to do so. There will be information on how to get a trial here at the end of the webinar. But we just wanted to show these in this context so that we could show you within an example. And this is actually one of our templates as well that was released this last week also. So that we took some of our cutout characters, put them in here, and create the scenario for you. So let's go through and read this. So Chris, would you mind reading this off the screen here?
Sure. So what we have here is we have some characters who we are asking them, what are the benefits of having a mentor? And then now we're going to go through the quotes of each character. Think about the character themselves that you're hearing this from, and think about what they're saying. And let's see if we can spot if your spidey senses tingle and you hear anything that you think could be an issue, and what would you change? And please use the questions panel for that, and we'll visit your comments as we go. So let's listen as these characters share their personal mentoring experiences. What works? What would you change? Let's go to our first character, Josh. My mentor provides expert advice and guidance. He makes sure I keep my eyes on the prize and I don't let outside distractions derail my career. My mentor keeps me focused. He isn't afraid to tell it like it is, even when I'm doing something wrong. And let's do this one and then we'll stop and we'll talk about these a little bit and unpack them. I always want to hear about my mentor's past experiences so I don't make the same mistakes. He knows what it takes to get ahead. Okay, any thoughts?
Yeah, what are your thoughts on this one? And I can go back to any stage in this that we want to talk about.
All right, well, as people are writing in their thoughts, I'll share mine. I noticed that all of the mentors are male.
Okay.
And very focused on career advancement and not so much work-life balance.
Okay. And so why is that for you? Why is that an issue? Why is that something that doesn't, drive well?
Well, for me personally, I would say that doesn't necessarily reflect my goals or like the personality or the approach that I would take to my career development. So I wouldn't necessarily feel like that mentor understood my needs.
Okay.
And okay. One person says this is a great opportunity to also include non-binary gender pronouns as you're revising it, showing more diverse mentors.
Okay.
And maybe, so someone said older professionals. They might be saying that all of the cutout people we're picturing here are older professionals.
Go back to number one, Josh. So how would you feel if you're a working mom and this character is telling you to keep your eye on the prize and don't let outside distractions derail your career?
Josh is like, I'm not a working mom. I don't know.
Not a working mom.
Right, but yeah. See, we have a diverse audience here, right? So see, yeah. But Josh, you wouldn't know that if you were writing that necessarily, would you?
Right? No, you wouldn't. No.
Right, but certainly, when I was growing up in my career as an entrepreneur, that was always top of mind, and it was just always really tough all the time. These signals I would get about what's important and what's not important at work, right? So how are we portraying our culture through what our characters are saying to us in our scenarios? Let's look at number two a second. He keeps me focused and he isn't afraid to tell it like it is, even when I'm doing something wrong. Josh, you had a really interesting comment. I don't know if you remember, but when we were writing out that scenario here, it made you feel icky. Do you remember why?
It really does, because like even reading it now, after reading it through it probably a dozen or more times now, just I think about my sister, and I think about other women that I know, and I wouldn't. And this is maybe a little bit of personal bias in here, but just given what's happened in the last several years, I wouldn't feel comfortable if her mentor was a male, because there's some implications there that are not great, because there's the whole idea behind, making them feel like they're wrong, making them feel like they're like it's more of like men domineering over women, which I don't doesn't jive well with me. Just from the way that I think of things, I don't really like it. Just doesn't feel right. Like there's just something about it that, to me, becomes very uncomfortable very quickly with it. And I've seen it, like I've seen some comments about friends and things of that nature on social media that are along this lines about people talking about their spouses or people that they know or whatnot. And it's uncomfortable to read this and be like, well, wait a second, that's like this is someone you're supposed to be respecting and have respect for. And
Yeah.
Not, right?
Yeah, I think your exact word was, wow, that kind of sounds like a gaslighting situation.
Yeah, I think that's what I said. Yeah. Which is definitely something we want to avoid whenever possible. Is well, actually, at all. Like, let's just get rid of that crap out of our stuff, out of our scenarios. Let's just make sure that we're not showing that.
I see a comment. Not everybody will necessarily understand what that phrase means. I think that was in reference to the first one, keeping my eyes on the prize. That's very true. That's another thing that's really important, especially as we develop for a global audience. We have to be pay attention to certain idioms and things that we use, sports metaphors, things of that nature that are very different. They mean different things and they come across differently to different people. And actually, is that really even, again, culturally, the metaphor that we want to use for describing a win-win situation in our business? We're going to keep our eye on the prize. I mean, we get a lot of these kinds of things in business. And again, myself, when I was coming up as an entrepreneur, I would be, all of these sports metaphors and things of how I was supposed to behave. And it's like, wait a minute. Yes, I'm a woman in business, but I'm very different from that. And I don't know how to be that way. Does that mean that's the only way I can succeed in the world as an entrepreneur is if I go out and I fight for it and I take things from people and so, yeah, these things have underlying implications that affect not just the words we're reading, but also reflect totally on your own culture and the message you're trying to get across.
Yeah, and I think it's good to, like, as we think about words, and as we talked about earlier, getting rid of bias, but I also think it's getting rid of any sort of, like you were saying, yeah, some people will know what that metaphor means or that terminology means. I think it's very important to think of, okay, if you were coming to this, like, you got to put yourself again in someone else's mindset and say, okay, would this word make sense? Because like in my current position and whatnot, I write a lot of tutorials. I write a lot of help videos as well, to where I go through maybe our legacy help materials and try to bring them up to a certain level of more modern language and things like that. And as you're looking at it, it's like, okay, well, would that make sense to someone that's new to this material, or would that make someone with this background? Like, you got to keep that in mind as you're writing, because yeah, you could use a metaphor or an analogy or whatever that would not apply to someone, would not make sense. And that's important too, just to keep that in mind, just in general. Maybe it's nothing very like offensive or things of that nature, but it could be just you don't want people to misunderstand you. That's really what's most important here.
Let's quickly debrief the third one before we move on to the next set here. And I always want to hear about my mentor's past experience so I don't make the same mistakes. He knows what it takes to get ahead. And again, do we have a mismatch of our character and what the quote is saying? I think it becomes a little obvious when we look at the next set, and it reads, we've changed these up a little bit. Again, he is the mentor. Yes, absolutely. And he knows what it takes to get ahead. So are we saying that this particular character needs somebody to tell them what it takes to succeed in your organization? And what does that imply if that's really the underlying message that we're sending here? So let's change them up. We changed up just a few words. We changed all three characters, but let's see how these play. what would you change about these? We're not saying we got it right. We really do want your feedback. And but let's see what we did maybe get a little better and what we could improve. So let's look at the first character here. My mentor provides expert advice and guidance. She makes sure I keep things in perspective and helps me find ways to balance my work and home life. How does that one feel?
I think based off of what Stephanie said earlier, it seemed like this one would jive more with what her thoughts on her life would be. Would be more a work-life balance versus I'm just trying to get ahead. I'm just trying to win. It's more about finding that balance, finding that happiness in life that way.
Yeah, we've
Someone
definitely got
does
some
point out we
comments.
shifted to all young people now, so that creates that could create a different message of who we do and don't want to work in the organization, or who is acceptable to hire and who will fit in our organization. That's very valid. So
that is very valid. Stephanie, what were you saying?
Oh yeah, I was just going to tell Chris she got some constructive criticism for the H's.
Yep. Okay. Yep. That's great. That's great. That's good. Thank you for that perspective. Let's look at the next character. My mentor keeps me focused. They aren't afraid to tell it like it is, even when I feel like I'm doing something wrong.
So I think this one, someone mentioned in the when we were talking about the first example, that it maybe needed more gender neutral pronouns, and that's what we threw in here, was to say they versus saying because it could be a man or a woman, it could be again non-binary in whatever way it needs to be, but this keeps it very, to me, it keeps it very generic and very, like, this one, honestly, out of all the examples that we have, this one to me feels the best and the most inclusive in a lot of ways, just because of the language that we use, because that takes out the whole he, she, it takes out that particular aspect, to where we could apply this to just about any of these people on the screen here, in their experience.
Steph, what do you see in there?
Yes, we also have a comment from someone saying they like that it says, even when I feel like I'm doing something wrong, not just when I do something wrong. That kind of opens it up a little bit and shows that they're taking more consideration into the employees' thoughts and perspectives.
Exactly.
I think even more than that, it kind of subtly implies it's okay to have feelings and come to work not having all the answers. And I think that's a really important message too, that people need to understand, that if you want creativity, if you want people who have the sense that it's okay to take risks, then using words like "I feel this way," not only does it show ownership of somebody's own feelings, but then now we're expressing that it's okay in the workplace to talk about them.
Right. Exactly.
And then our last character here. I always want to hear about my mentor's past experiences. Maybe I won't have to go through the same struggles. He supports my ambition.
What are some thoughts around this one?
Let's see, we've got an interesting thought. Making feminine coded language more professionally acceptable, such as I think, I feel, when especially corporate culture traditionally has prioritized masculine coded communication. I will, I am, I do, is useful for these type of scenarios.
That's great.
And then we do have an interesting question I want to hear your thoughts on, everybody. Do you feel like by intentionally including all minorities, it's excluding those who are not part of a minority?
Right, and I would not, again, being inclusive does not mean changing up every character in your course for a minority. This is an illustrative example. And also, this is an example of us putting forward some inclusive characters, because because Josh is going to tell you, we have some new inclusive characters, and we know through our clients that they have been traditionally underrepresented in a lot of libraries of characters, and also so we did want to feature them here. But absolutely, being inclusive means knowing your audience and making sure that your audience can see themselves in your learning. Being inclusive does not mean never having a Caucasian male as a leader in your organization. It does not mean excluding all majority people from your learning. It means representing diversity. And yes, in this illustrative example, we did, for our own reasons, choose the characters that we chose to highlight. But valid point, and thank you for pointing that out.
It's very valid, and it is kind of a fine line to where it's like, okay, I'm now including all these different minorities in here, but am I excluding anybody? If I was to add a fourth person in here, we just kind of kept this so that it was parity as well. We would have put maybe a Caucasian male or woman in there to include that particular diversity, because we want to make sure that it's about making no one feel left out, no one feel like it doesn't apply to them. We want to make sure that everyone does. Like Chris said, this was kind of our own means that we did it this way, that we use these particular characters. But when you're within your organization, you want to represent as many people as you possibly can within your different scenarios, different learning experiences. So just keep that in mind. It is a fine line to walk, to where you want to make sure you're getting as much diversity as you can in there without maybe over-representing a particular population if that's not applicable to your organization.
And then it's no longer authentic.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And so just to close this exercise, I just wanted to point out, somebody else pointed out that he supports my ambition, because that empowers this character and shows them in the light of being ambitious and wanting to get ahead in their career, and that sends a message that needs to be heard.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very important. Okay, so we're going to close this out for now, but we're going to move on to our last couple slides here. So as we mentioned, like for us at eLearning Brothers, we're like striving to be more inclusive in our product line and everything that we're doing. And to that end, we are adding more cutout characters to our library to help with scenarios and other e-learning experiences. And so we've added a set of 5 new characters. I think they're great. I've been, like I said, this is one of my products, and I've been very involved in the process of getting these into the library. Something I'm very passionate about. This is actually the most excited I've been about a product release. I can honestly say that because it's been a very personal thing to me. Because again, it helped me look at my own biases and say, okay, well, what about this person works out? Like, we had to look very detailed at each of these individuals as they were presented to us as potential characters, to make sure that we were, again, including everyone, not excluding someone based off of a bias and things of that nature. And so you'll see more of these come out throughout the year, but for right now, we've had these first 5, and I just absolutely love all of these characters and what we've been able to add to this library. That doesn't mean that our library doesn't include other diverse characters. That's actually something that, if you really look at it and look at it in depth, you'll notice that we are fairly diverse in our different characters that we offer, from our different ones in different attire to different people and from different cultures, different industries, and things of that nature. And we are trying to do better at that. And so we always invite feedback through the community or through other channels to us to be able to continue to improve this library. And if you do love these characters, we'd like to add as many as we possibly can. So just let us know your feelings on these ones. So that way we can then maybe add more than we were initially planning on, or add them at a faster rate because of people of demand here. Because we really want to listen to you as the community to tell us what you're looking for. But we really want to again, we're just trying to keep these more diverse. So you'll notice they are all minorities this time. That was just something where we sent out a questionnaire to some of our customers to ask, who they felt was underrepresented in the library. And that's where we came up with these particular individuals, is because they're from backgrounds that are not necessarily represented in our library. And so we wanted to be more inclusive. You also notice there's some things visually about them too, to where, like, In our library in the past, we've kind of kept things very clean cut. We wanted to include some people that maybe had some body art and things of that nature as well to make them look more modern and more refreshed, more modern clothing, more of those things. So we made sure that we're able to bring more diversity into our product line that way. And lastly, again, these characters are all available directly in our own product. So in Lectora desktop and Lectora Online, you can access them there. They're also available just directly from our asset library if you use a different authoring tool or PowerPoint or whatever you can use. They also work pretty well in VR if you see Scenario VR and things of that nature. We have some examples up in Scenario VR for where cutout characters were used, and they actually turn out pretty neat. So they can really apply to anything, and they can just help bring kind of I don't know, when you see someone talking to you in a scenario like we just did, I think to me it feels more personal. It helps me connect with that more than just saying, okay, on the screen I have this question, okay, let me click, the answer. I think it's this one. Like, but when someone's talking to me and telling me, these things, their feelings and things, I connect with that more myself. And so I just invite you to kind of bring that into your own learning as you're creating that. With that being said, Stephanie, is there any final questions that we can answer for the audience?
I think that we have covered all of the questions. Seems like people really enjoyed that exercise and telling you guys what you did wrong with your scenario. Thank you, everyone, for your input. It's always a learning process for all of us. Now, as Josh has kindly shared this call to action slide for me, I would like to let everyone know you can get a free trial of Lectura and the Asset Library. I posted those links in the chat. And if you want to continue the conversation about inclusivity and creating more realistic scenarios, head on over to the Rockstars community where you can connect with other instructional designers. And I know that Chris is always in the community, and a lot of our product team is there to answer questions and offer suggestions. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. I think this has been a great discussion and hopefully was helpful and gave everyone some good ideas for their next scenario. And this is recorded, so you'll be getting an email with it, and you can find it also on our blog and YouTube later in the week. Thank you, Josh and Chris, so much for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
See you all at the next webinar.